Hollywood functions in conjunction with both concentrated corporate ownership and government agencies in order to create a military media complex as a means to divert any systemic critique of America, while simultaneously fast-tracking films with nationalistic themes. Cooperation between Hollywood and the military dates back to the 1920s, when the Pentagon helped produce a movie about World War I fighter pilots better known as Wings, that went on to win the first Academy Award for Best Picture. The relationship between movie studios and the military has varied slightly in the decades since, but the military tends to get more involved in times of conflict. For instance, during World War II, the Department of Defense, or DoD, enlisted Disney to create propaganda films for every branch of the U.S. military. The U.S. Office of War Information had a unit dedicated exclusively to reviewing Hollywood films, called the Bureau of Motion Pictures. Between 1942 and 1945, the Bureau reviewed 1,652 scripts, revising or discarding anything that portrayed the U.S. unfavorably. With this, the increasing synergy between Hollywood and the Pentagon led to the current military entertainment complex, in which movie studios get to use taxpayer-subsidized military locations, equipment, personnel, and expertise in exchange for giving the military script approval. For example, Top Gun was developed in collaboration with the Pentagon and caused military enlistment to spike in numbers. The Navy even set up recruitment tables at the theaters showing the movie, and polls began to show rising confidence in the military. During production of Top Gun, the Pentagon worked side by side with filmmakers, reportedly only charging Paramount Pictures $1.8 million for the use of its warplanes and aircraft carriers. For instance, Goose's death was changed from a mid-air collision to an ejection scene because the Navy was concerned for the amount of on-screen pilot deaths. Additionally, the association between Marvel films and the U.S. DoD dates back to 2003, when the Pentagon cut a similar deal with the production of Hulk for access to military bases and equipment. The changes made in the Hulk script sought to eliminate any questionable ethics of the American military-industrial complex. For instance, they removed dialogue that references military experiments on human subjects, and they changed the name of the lab where Bruce Banner's father irradiates himself from a military lab to a civilian facility. However, we see a shift in the portrayal of the U.S. military, as well as the depiction of the enemy following the terrorist attack on September 11th in the United States. According to Martin Bradley, 9/11 ultimately shattered the belief of American and Western invincibility against large-scale violence, which is often assumed in developing and unstable nations. In terms of media exposure of the attacks, media outlets constantly broadcasted the horror and fortune of the attacks repeatedly on television, ultimately contributing to the us versus them attitude projected onto many Americans. With this, post-9/11 America featured a vast array of censorships, cancellations, rewrites, and re-edits of video games, TV shows, and films, including the first Spider-Man film in which the Twin Towers originally had appeared. In November 2001, the Bush administration met with many Hollywood executives to outline several themes for films to follow. With this, post-9/11 Marvel films have typically portrayed an America that only acts in self-defense from the ever-presenting looming dangers and threats, often perpetrated by the outsiders who possess the potential to cause mass destruction. And ultimately, we could argue this belief has manifested in portrayals of enemies to be non-white, foreign persons, or countries on screen that the U.S. military and the Marvel hero band together to fight. For the more recent Marvel Cinematic Universe films, explicit changes made in the scripts from the DoD are not as disclosed. Knowing that the DoD performs script revisions in order to rent out their facilities, there are themes in Marvel films that address American militarism that could be recontextualized and reframed as propaganda. Iron Man acknowledges corruption in the weapons manufacturing industry and how Stark Industries unintentionally benefits and supplies weapons to a terrorist organization. However, criticism is placed on one individual character, Obadiah Stane, as opposed to the military-industrial complex as a whole or the validity of the war in Afghanistan. In the opening scene of the film, the American military's presence in the Middle East is heavily glamorized. Tony Stark rides in with a convoy of military Humvees as AC/DC's Back in Black plays. He laughs and smiles with the soldiers until they are attacked by the enemy. In this scene, the American military is not displayed as a threat and only responds with violence if aggression from the enemy is initiated. To counteract the generally neutral representation of the American military, Obadiah Stane is singled out as a bad actor in the weapons manufacturing industry, as he later reveals that he doesn't care which side he's supplying weapons. By framing Obadiah as the sole antagonist, the military-industrial complex absolves itself of any criticism. Another example of this is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This movie is one of the more critical Marvel films of the American policy and its condemnation of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s mass civilian surveillance operation. Despite this, any parallels to real American intelligence organizations are no longer applicable when it's revealed that SHIELD is compromised by a fictional neo-Nazi organization known as Hydra. Nazi influence is only centralized within SHIELD, not other governmental agencies, and easily defeated by Captain America. The difference between Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Iron Man is that SHIELD is portrayed as fundamentally corrupt as an organization that needs to be shut down completely, instead of one individual at fault. However, Hydra is still a fictional neo-Nazi organization only loosely tied to today's alt-right and white nationalists. Captain Marvel represents the rebirth of this long-standing relationship and effort to reboot not just the Marvel Universe, but also its connections with the Pentagon. According to Tom Secker, the Pentagon evidently saw the character of Captain Marvel, a female superhero who joins the Air Force, as a recruitment-boosting tool. The Air Force even produced a recruitment ad inspired by the film that targeted female audiences by portraying women in the Air Force. Despite the Pentagon's best efforts, the backlash has already begun, with some commenters suggesting that Captain Marvel's feminist credentials are a Trojan horse for militarism due to the film's glamorization of the Air Force. So, with all this being said, what's in store for Marvel's future and its relationship with the military? According to Days Johnson, Marvel's latest release, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, surprisingly breaks from Marvel's track record of military meddling and explores sensitive issues that have been largely ignored in the past by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, including the military's history of racism and the U.S. government's mistreatment of its veterans. The plot of the MCU series revolves around Sam Wilson's journey to become the new Captain America, as well as focusing on the struggles Bucky Barnes faces as he confronts the trauma stemming from his time as the Winter Soldier. Ultimately, both Wilson and Bucky are faced with the realization that the government that their lives were built around defending have turned its back on them for one reason or another, be it systemic racism or unassisted rage issues due to trauma. With this deviation from the Marvel norm, it sheds light on the idea that the MCU is a film series that is constantly engaged in displays of the U.S. military, but it is ever-changing as well.
And that is unique to Sam. This suit's largely white design reflects Sam's look